please. The subject matter for late debate has been chosen, and I will now read, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly commit to making life affordable for Nova Scotians and urge the government to reverse their expensive policies so fewer adults will have to make that decision and fewer children will need to rely on food banks to eat. Submitted by the honourable member for Cape Breton West. Presenting and reading petitions, the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition with the operative clause. The petitioners call upon the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to use its powers over the Board of Commissioners of Public Utilities to deny any general rate application presented by NSPI requesting a rate increases in 2013, 2014, and 2015. And I have affixed my signature to the 101 presented here.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I read this on behalf of the Premier. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas MAD Canada's 25th annual project Red Ribbon campaign uses the iconic red ribbon as an appeal to drive sober during the holiday season and as a tribute to all victims killed or injured by impaired drivers. And whereas each year from November 1st to the first Monday after New Year's Day, volunteers in communities across Canada distribute millions of red ribbons to the public, reminding people to plan ahead to get home safely when drinking or doing drugs. And whereas it is important to honor and celebrate the longevity and effectiveness of this program and promote the program Drive Sober message at a critical time of year as the 25th annual campaign begins. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House support the proclamation of November the 1st, 2012 as MAD Canada Project Red Ribbon Day in the province to mark this very special 25th year milestone for the Red Ribbon campaign. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on November 1st, 2012, the Coast publication released their annual Best Of edition, which named the Museum of Natural History and the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic as their readers' favorite museums this year. And whereas the Museum of Natural History has had much success attracting visitors to popular exhibits such as our Amazing World featuring science on a sphere and Out of This World, extraordinary costumes from film and television. And whereas the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic has welcomed about 25% more visitors than last year as a result of exhibits based on the RMS Titanic, cable ships, and Nova Scotia's seafaring culture, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates the Museum of Natural History and the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic for being voted the top 2 museums in Halifax by the Coast readers, and thanks to staff and volunteers of the Nova Scotia Museum for doing a fantastic job promoting the province's rich heritage. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the consent of the House, I would ask you to revert back to the order of business to tabling reports.
There's been a motion before to revert back to the order to presenting reports of committees. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table report, the annual report of the Standing Committee of Public Accounts.
The report is tabled. We will now go to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 2005, the Bee Industry Act.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 2005, the Bee Industry Act.
Bill number 109, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 2005, the Bee Industry Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to leave. I beg leave to introduce. I could. Please let me go. See you later. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce, on behalf of the member from Annapolis, an act to ensure appropriate supports in the classroom for children with special needs.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Ensure Appropriate Supports in Classrooms for Children with Special Needs.
Bill number 110, entitled An Act to Ensure Appropriate Supports in the Classroom for Children with Special Needs.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce the bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2010, the Fur Industry Act.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2010, the Fur Industry Act.
Bill number 111, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2010, the Fur Industry Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Bill number 112, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future days to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the third party's leader told a Halifax newspaper he supported the Harper government's changes to EI, but only thought the government should move more slowly. And whereas the leader of the third party was silent on Harper's planned privatization of the Highland Links, a golf course in the riding of the member of Victoria the Lakes. And whereas the leader of the third party earned hundreds of thousands of dollars from government appointments under the Harper government. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly recognize that the leader of the third party is too cozy with Stephen Harper and that his friendship with Harper puts the member from Victoria the Lakes at risk. I would ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteer service clubs add an important component to the livability of a community, and whereas Lions Club's members have been offering their services to the public since their founding in 1917 by businessman Melvin Jones, and whereas on November 3rd, 2012, Enfield Elmsdale District Lions Club will be celebrating the 40th year of their charter. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the members of the Enfield Elmsdale District Lions Club on their 40th anniversary and wishes them success on their future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you don't mind, I'd like to make an introduction. I know my colleague here was good enough to read my resolution on my behalf. I had intended to do the introduction and then read the resolution. I want to thank her for doing that. So I thought I would extend now the welcome to members, to the people who are joining us here in the gallery. So today in the Speaker's Gallery are members of the Halifax Regional Police and Mad Canada to mark the 25th anniversary of the Red Ribbon Campaign. For those who may not know, Mr. Speaker, the Red Ribbon Campaign is an appeal to Canadians to drive sober during the holiday season and a tribute to all the victims killed or injured by impaired drivers. I believe all the members of the House were presented with red ribbons. I encourage them to wear them and to share them with others what they mean and what they stand for. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce now Constable John McLeod, Susan McCaskill, who is the regional manager of chapter services with MAD, and her grandson, Brendan. There he is. Anissa Aldridge, president of the Halifax Regional Chapter of MAD. And finally, Mr. Speaker, a gentleman I believe at least the leader of the opposition knows reasonably well, his brother, Deputy Chief Chris McNeil. Mr. Speaker, I would ask all the members to give our guests a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 21st, 2012, the Pharmacy Association of Nova Scotia presented awards to distinguished members at its annual conference. Whereas the Member of the Year award honors a pharmacist who has demonstrated an active interest in the promotion of pharmacy by personal example and by participating in endeavours having a direct impact on the profession. And whereas Michael Hatt of Port Hawkesbury received the 2012 Member of the Year award for significant contributions to his community through involvement in the Canadian Cancer Society Relay for Life, the Rock Society, and through his caring relationships built on trust involving follow-up treatment with his patients. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature congratulate Michael Hatt of the Medicine Shop Pharmacy in Port Hawkesbury in receiving the Pharmacy Association Nova Scotia Member of the Year Award and extend our best wishes for many more years of exceptional quality of care to his patients and invaluable contributions to his community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, November 1st, is the anniversary of the horrific No. 4 mine shaft explosion that devastated the town of Spring Hill. And whereas we pay tribute to the tragic loss of those 39 miners today and honor the brave men and women who put their own lives at risk to rescue nearly 90 others. Whereas, though this day is marked by tragedy, it is also a reminder to all of us of the incredible courage and generosity of our fellow Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize this day as an important one in our history and honor both the lives lost and also those saved on that tragic day. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the honourable member from Timberley Prospect, who sits in this House today, was first elected to serve in the spring of 1998 and has been my trusted and esteemed colleague ever since. And whereas this member has loyally and unfailingly worked for the constituents of Timberley Prospect every day since and including Sundays and holidays. And whereas today, the Coast magazine has named the honourable member from Timberley Prospect as, I quote, best member of the provincial legislature, saying that he is a hands down the nicest and most liked politician in Nova Scotia. That's a problem with freedom of the press, folks. Therefore, be it resolved that the House congratulates and applauds the honourable member from Timberley Prospect on his well-deserved recognition and applaud his unfailing and unwavering service to his constituents since 1998. I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kathy Spurl of the Valley Drug Mart in Kingston is this year's recipient of the Pfizer Consumer Healthcare Bowl of Hygeia, and whereas Kathy has demonstrated her commitment to the community in many ways, including involvement in the school, church, and public events, and whereas Kathy has practiced community pharmacy since 1983, continues to support her fellow citizens by actively participating in a multitude of events, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly recognize and congratulate Kathy Spurl as this year's recipient of the Bowl of Hygeia Award for 2012. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Premier has ignored repeated calls to fire his Minister of Community Services, and whereas the Minister of Community Services has been chastised over the handling of the Talbot House affair, and whereas the Premier has acknowledged the Minister of Community Services is incapable of overseeing the province's recovery houses, as evidenced by his decision to strip her off the file and transfer it to the Department of Health and Wellness, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly urge the member for Halifax-Shabukto to speak up and tell the Premier to fire his incompetent Minister of Community Services and finally put him in Cabinet instead.
The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto.
On a slightly different point, Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas today is the 18th anniversary of the former Liberal government's implementation of a 3% wage rollback that affected 60,000 public sector workers, and whereas this decision on the part of that Liberal government meant that hard-working Nova Scotia employees took home less money at the end of each week, and whereas this decision also served to make life more expensive for Nova Scotia families, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that when last in government, the Liberal Party made life more difficult for Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Geeks Frenchies stores from across Nova Scotia and New Brunswick hold annual fundraisers for the IWK Health Centre, and whereas the 2012 campaign raised over $83,000, enabling them to purchase a Pixis C11 safe that controls narcotics and controlled substance in different sections of the hospital. And whereas Yvonne Surette collected $7,553, once again making her the top fundraiser, therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the staff and customers of Geeks Frenchies for their effort to raise money for the IWK Health Centre and wish them continued success in their future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Eskasoni, the largest First Nation community in Atlantic Canada, held its election for chief and council on October the 26th. And whereas 3 individuals let their names stand for the position of chief. And whereas Chief Leroy Dennery was re-elected with 65% of the popular vote and more than double the number of votes for his closest opponent. Therefore, be resolved that all
Whereas today is the 18th anniversary of the former Liberal government's implementation of a 3% wage rollback that affected 60,000 public sector workers, and whereas this rollback came just 1 year after the former Liberal government forced employees to take 5 days of unpaid leave, and whereas today, carrying on the great tradition of Nova Scotia Liberals, the current Liberal caucus is proposing an electricity plan that would see power rates increase between 30 and 50%, Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House recognize the trend and long-term tradition of the Liberals to make decisions like rolling back wages, instituting unpaid leaves, and proposing plans that will significantly increase electricity rates that make life more expensive for Nova Scotia families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice of passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. I will now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Tornadoes team of the First Lego League at the Maritime Sikh Society chose to study seniors' issues this year as part of their activities in science and technology. And whereas the youth aged 9 to 14 soon realized the devastating impact of Alzheimer's disease among seniors and responded by holding a delicious Indian food fundraising dinner on October 27, 2012, which raised $1,000 for the Alzheimer's Society. And whereas the event included a skit from the youth, their suggestions for new inventions that could help caregivers and those living with Alzheimer's, and remarks from a representative of the Alzheimer's Society. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the 7 youth members of the Tornadoes team, their coach, Manavinder Dhillon, and the Maritime Sikh Society on truly making a difference in the community by holding such a successful fundraiser and supporting a wonderful cause. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day you should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas yesterday the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture told reporters, quote, I will stand and defend, unquote, the untendered lease agreement with Cornwallis. But when he had the chance to do just that during question period, he refused, passing questions off to the Premier. And whereas only 1 hour after the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture declared that the lease agreement was a good deal, the Premier said he wasn't satisfied with some of the answers that he'd received about it. Whereas it appears to Nova Scotians that the Premier had had enough of the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture's mishandling of the agreement and has taken it over himself. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly note that it's been a tough fall for the Minister of Agriculture, or Fisheries and Aquaculture, who had his constituency taken away from him and now has had the responsibility for an important government initiative taken away from him as well. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today is the 18th anniversary of the former Liberal government's implementation of a 3% wage rollback that affected 60,000 public sector workers, and whereas this rollback came just 1 year after the former Liberal government forced employees to take 5 days of unpaid leave, and whereas the combination of these two decisions in just 2 short years meant the Nova Scotia workers and their families had a harder time making ends meet. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly remember this anniversary and the impact the decisions of the former Liberal government made on Nova Scotians and their families. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tiffany Crocker was born in St. John's, Newfoundland, attended Memorial University and also University St. Anne in Nova Scotia, and is currently working on her Master's of Education at Acadia University. And whereas after teaching in Newfoundland, she moved to Nova Scotia and began her teaching career here as a French immersion teacher. Whereas Ms. Crocker has a special gift to recognize problems or excellence in her pupils and has done special work with many of her students by reporting potential problems of all kinds back to the parents. Therefore, we resolve the members of this House join me in congratulating Tiffany Crocker for her many achievements and the wonderful work she is attaining with Nova Scotia students. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 4th annual Northside Benchwarmers Invitational Women's Hockey Tournament has thrown its support behind 5-year-old Samantha St. Cyr, who is suffering from a rare form of cancer impacting the kidneys. And whereas the tournament organizer, Angela Hall, said all proceeds from the tournament will be given to the St. Cyr family to help offset the costs associated with Samantha's medical needs. And whereas tournament organizers expect to surpass the tournament's typical $6,000 fundraiser efforts. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly salute the Northside Benchwarmers for their compassion and kindness and wish the St. Cyr family the best as they support Samantha through her health challenges. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. David Henderson is the medical director of the palliative care program with the Colchester East Hants Health Authority, and whereas Dr. Henderson also serves as the secretary and treasurer of the Canadian Society of Palliative Care Physicians, has served on the board of directors for the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, and is a past president of the Nova Scotia Hospice Palliative Care Association. And whereas Dr. Henderson is known for his leadership and dedication in working to enhance access to palliative care services, his goals since he began working in the field. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Dr. David Henderson for being awarded a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal at a ceremony held at the International Congress on Palliative Care in Montreal in recognition of his dedication to the service for families, communities, and country. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 25th, Lillian McKinnon, a resident of Cape North, completed her journey on earth and passed peacefully to her eternal rest. And whereas Lillian was born on August 3rd, 1905 in Marguerite, and later settled in Cape North, where she married Kenneth McKinnon in 1927, raised her family and worked as a school teacher. And whereas this funny, kind, intelligent lady was Victoria County's oldest resident and possibly the oldest resident of Nova Scotia, was an inspiration to all who knew her, died at the age of 107. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend deepest sympathy to the family and caregivers of Lillian McKinnon on her passing. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jean Woodworth was an accomplished nurse, artist, and beloved wife, mother, grandmother, volunteer, and friend. And whereas Jean was a key volunteer for many Bedford groups, including Charles P. Allen High School, the Hospice Society of Greater Halifax, Bedford Baptist Church, and Beacon House, so much so that she was named Bedford's 2010 Adult Volunteer of the Year. And whereas Jean passed away on October 19, 2012, at the age of 81, therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly send our condolences to Jean's family, husband Garfield, daughter Kim Dompierre, and grandsons Matt and Chris Dompierre on the passing of this remarkable woman. She will be missed. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Crime Prevention and Community Safety Month, and whereas the Canadian Safety Council dedicates this month to a broad array of safety topics that affect the community and offers advice to Canadians about how to live securely in our own communities. And whereas people in Halifax live in a city with the highest homicide rate in the country, the highest attempted murder rate, and the highest number of weapons violations in the country. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly thank the Canadian Safety Council for their advice and education and urge all Nova Scotians to inform themselves on ways to stay safe in their communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October the 19th, a troop of 30 Digby residents and Mayor Ben Cleveland traveled to St. John to oversee the return of the Digby Pier Light. And whereas the decision was made in 1970 by the Coast Guard to ship the lighthouse to St. John for storage after it was no longer being used. And whereas renovations on the lighthouse will take place throughout the winter season with a June celebration to relight the lighthouse in the exact spot it sat for 40 years ago. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the residents and Mayor Cleveland for the coming together to bring this ionic lighthouse back to its rightful home. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 16-year-old Yarmouth County resident Zach Tebow has been playing baseball since he was 3 years old and has had great success in the sport. And whereas Zach Tebow played, no relation. Whereas Zach Tebow played midget AAA baseball this year with a team in Kentville and was also a member of the Nova Scotia Select Squad that competed in Ontario for the Canada Cup tournament in August. And whereas Zach Tebow is currently enrolled in grade 11 in Alberta through the Prospects Academy in St. Albert, an academic and baseball development program, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Zach Tebow on his many impressive achievements in the sport of baseball and wish him luck and continued success in the Prospects Academy as he continues to make his community proud. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP government has mismanaged the economy of Nova Scotia since taking power, resulting in the worst performing economy in the country. And whereas in the last year alone, 8,600 Nova Scotians have lost full-time work. And whereas the provincial economy is being downgraded by private and public sector analysts. Therefore, be it resolved that the member for Halifax Needham remind the Premier and the rest of the NDP cabinet that because of their mismanagement of the economy, more Nova Scotians are facing layoffs and job insecurity, and that part-time work is not a substitute for the security of a full-time job. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Carol Hampsey of Berwick was inducted into Berwick Sports Hall of Fame in June 2012 for her championship curling abilities. And whereas Carol Hampsey began her competitive curling career in 1965 at the Berwick Curling Club and still curls there recreationally today. And whereas Carol competed on the national level in many tournaments, was always a strong contender in any tournament she entered, and a valuable team member as well. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize and congratulate Carol Hampsey for her induction into the Berwick Sports Hall of Fame. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Red Cape Restaurant Yarmouth Band Team Female Mariners Hockey Team was presented with the Exceptional Service Award during the Mel Heb Hourglass Action Awards in June during Access Awareness Week. And whereas the Exceptional Service Award recognizes an organization or a member of an organization that has gone beyond their mandate in service to persons with disabilities. And whereas the hockey team is being honored for its effort to include the sister of one of the team's members in their hockey season, therefore it be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Red Cape Restaurant Yarmouth Bantam Female Mariners hockey team for receiving the Exceptional Service Award. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jessie Davies was born and brought up in Eastern Passage, Nova Scotia, and in 1973, her and her husband moved to the community of Lake Echo, where they brought up their 3 sons. Where she joined the newly formed Lake Echo Food Bank while it was still in its infancy. And in 2002, she became its chairperson. And they serve over 45 families every month, depending solely upon donations from Feed Nova Scotia and local churches. Where she still finds time to work in the elementary school system as a special needs caregiver, work she has been doing since 1996. Which she thoroughly enjoys, and she also has been a member and a volunteer for the Lake Echo Lioness Club. Therefore, be resolved, the members of this House of Assembly recognize Jessie Davis for the contribution she has made to her community and to our province. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this year the province's dairy farmers donated 2,700 kilograms of skim milk powders to Feed Nova Scotia, and whereas milk not targeted for the fluid market is used to make products such as cheese and butter, and the skim milk, a byproduct of the process, is dried into a non-perishable powder, and whereas the cost to fund the donation is between $8,000 and $10,000 annually and is provided collectively through dairy farmers in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of this critical contribution made by the dairy farmers in our province to assist programs, and thank those farmers, such as Jerry Brower and his son Brian from Brookside, Colchester North, who have contributed to the skim milk donation program since its inception in 2005. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. I will now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Louise McKinnon was a teacher and vice principal for 35 years with the Halifax Regional School Board, spending many of those years at Sunnyside Schools in Bedford, where Miss McKinnon was a devoted and kind presence. And whereas Louise retired in June 2009, returning home to Sydney, where she turned her attention to her family and enjoyed skating, gardening, walking, and chatting with her neighbors. And whereas Louise passed away in June of this year at the age of just 59, therefore be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly send our condolences to the family, friends, and former students of Louise McKinnon. She will be missed. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June the 7th, the Tri-County Regional School Science Olympics were held in Meadowfields Community School in Yarmouth. And whereas the Smart Einsteins from Weymouth Consolidated captured both the overall title and gold in the Grade 4 division. And whereas the winning team, consisting of Kaylee White, Melina Marr, Renee Ford, and Aaron Potvin, scored 23.66 out of 25. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Smart Einsteins on their win and wish them continued success and interest in the world of science. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Allie Berry, a grade 12 student at Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High School, has been playing basketball for as long as she can remember, and has had much success in the sport. And whereas this summer, Ali Berry traveled to and from Halifax to practice and compete with the Nova Scotia U17 women's basketball team. And whereas in August, Team Nova Scotia competed in the women's under-17 national championships in Fredericton, where Ali Berry was the starting center on the team, led her team in shooting percentage with 53.1%, and was the leading rebounder for the Nova Scotia team, helping the team win the tournament silver medal. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Ali Berry on being an integral part of Team Nova Scotia's silver medal winning performance during the women's under-17 national basketball championships, and wish her continued success in the sport of basketball. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 2:48. Will end at 3:48. I will now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. This government has decided to sign big deals with big business that lack job guarantees. This is this minister's economic development strategy. One, he is responsible to taxpayers for these decisions. With 6 large corporations receiving $590 million in commitments, small businesses are struggling to get capital they need. And it's not just capital Nova Scotian businesses are struggling with, Mr. Speaker. They are hit with high production costs such as power, as well as marketplace challenges. Mr. Speaker, we learned today that Minas Basin Pulp and Power's containerboard mill in Hansport will be closing in December. My question to the Minister, when did the Minister find out about this situation in Hansport?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to stand in my place, and my first response to the question is that this is a very sad day. I grew up in Hants County in Windsor, Nova Scotia, a little place called Curry's Corner, and I was just mentioning to the member from Hants that I think anyone that was born and raised in Hants County, we either know a relative or a friend that's been employed at Minas Basin. Our first concern is for the women and the men and their families for those lost jobs. And I first heard about it from a letter that I received this morning on my BlackBerry.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By failing to invest in small and medium-sized businesses and by doubling down on 6 large corporations, this government has failed to diversify our economy. This leaves communities that the government has tethered to those corporations in jeopardy. An essential component of sustainable economic growth is a well-diversified economy. But when the government abandons the fundamentals of economic development in order to write blank checks to big corporations, our economy suffers. Today, job losses in Hansport are evidence that the NDP needs to focus on diversifying the economy in our province. Mr. Speaker, when will the minister take proactive measures to start diversifying the economies of our communities across Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed a sad day. It's even sadder when any member of this House tries to make political gain out of the misfortune of others. Mr. Speaker, we have gone through great gains to create employment in the province of Nova Scotia, especially for small and medium-sized companies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in Glace Bay alone, there's a company there called Stream. And I would say that if it hadn't been for this government, Stream wouldn't be there. But if it hadn't been for the Liberal government, they'd be fighting a 30 to a 50% increase in electricity, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we have a very serious problem with Minas Basin Pulp and Power, and the minister comes up and talks about an investment in Glace Bay. The reality is that our economy is not diversified. Our rural communities are struggling to create jobs. This is another indication that our economy is not diversified in this province. And the minister turns to political shots to try to make a point that makes no sense in this day and age. There have been 8,600 full-time jobs lost in the last year in this province. More people on EI, more people forced into part-time work. There are 135 employees of Molson Minus Basin Pulp and Power in Hansport who are dealing with the closure of their containerboard mill. We are told that 40 of those employees will be transitioned to a sister company, but that still leaves 95 people without work. The loss of this mill shows that the NDP corporate handouts are not a substitution for a well-diversified and competitive economy. So my question to the minister, has there been any commitment by this government to put funding into Minus Basin Pulp and Power?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, it's again, I hear the member opposite taking numbers that are purely fictional. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, since June, as I mentioned yesterday, we created 8,800 jobs, Mr. Speaker, in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, there's a little company, Allendale Electronics in Lockport. Mr. Speaker, they are in business because of efforts on their behalf by this government. Mr. Speaker, we take this very, very serious. Through our plan, we have things on the horizon. Irving Shipyard, peak time, Mr. Speaker, 11,500 jobs, Mr. Speaker. We worked with Minus Basin Pulp and Paper, Mr. Speaker. We activated a loan to them, Mr. Speaker. $6.7 million, Mr. Speaker. We are there to help companies, Mr. Speaker. We've been doing it, and we will continue to do it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today, 135 workers at the Minus Basin Pulp and Power Mill got some very devastating news. Those 135 hardworking Nova Scotians were told today that they would be unemployed in December when the mill shuts down for good. The companies cite it as part of their problems, rising cost of operation, as one of the reasons they're closing this plant. Mr. Speaker, I'll table the document in a few minutes that I'm going to speak from. My question, how can the Minister of Economic and Rural Development say that his jobs plan is working when we've got 135 examples today that prove that it is not?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as anyone with any reasonable common sense will know, that there are things going on in the global economy that are certainly out of the control of government. Mr. Speaker, I find it very ironic. I find it very ironic, Mr. Speaker, that somebody from the third party would get up and ask that question and make those statements because Mr. Speaker, I will read you something from today's paper. This was a company that was in Nova Scotia in 2005 decided to leave Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I will quote you and I will table this.
Order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development has the floor, please.
I probably wouldn't go back to Nova Scotia after what took place with us there. And he's talking about 2005, Mr. Speaker. Who was in power then, Mr. Speaker? That government.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker.
That'll help. Where did you find it? Where did you find it?
Mr. Speaker, this is 2012.
That's right.
And I'm standing in my place today, Mr. Speaker, to talk about the 135 jobs that have been lost. That's what I'm doing, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of them very people that I represent. That's my job in this House, Mr. Speaker, and you, as well as every member in this place, I'm sure, expects that to happen.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, we know that there's been thousands of jobs lost in this province outside of this minister's watch. To say his plan is working is an insult to these people, Mr. Speaker. In the Valley alone, we lost, in my own constituency, 150 jobs. 150 jobs over at Fundy Gypsum, Mr. Speaker. Not a word said from government. Nothing there. Not a thing. Where were they then, Mr. Speaker? You can cite everything from 2005 and beyond yesterday that you want. It's important today. Where are we going? We're not going anywhere as far as we can tell. What is the plan, Mr. Speaker? What action is the minister going to take to stop the bleeding in the Annapolis Valley, Mr. Speaker? What does he plan on doing to help all of those in the valley who've lost jobs under this watch?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
You know, Mr. Speaker, much like New Page, much like Bowater, much about those individuals that jobs were threatened or lost jobs. This government and this premier sitting here, we were the first ones on site. Mr. Speaker, through labor and advanced education, and I don't want to speak for the minister, but I got the utmost confidence that a transition team has been in place, will be working with those displaced employees, the same as we did in the mills when Bowater ran into trouble, the same as we did when Port Hawkesbury. Those individuals appreciated it because who was the first on site? This premier was the first on site, and this government, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a little different. Scotia Investments put right in their note that they released today, and I'll quote it and then I'll table it, Mr. Speaker. While we've worked closely with governments for many years, we are not seeking support for the mill. This isn't about another handout, Mr. Speaker. This is about 135 people and the jobs that exist there today that will be gone at the end of this year, Mr. Speaker. The question is very simple, and I'll get right to it, Mr. Speaker. It adds to the numbers. When will this minister finally admit that the plan is not working? They don't care about the statistics from anywhere. They care about the 135 jobs and their families, Mr. Speaker, and how they're going to put food on their tables, Mr. Speaker, and how they're going to pay their power bills, Mr. Speaker. When will this government stand up and say the program is not working? When will they introduce something that will create jobs in this province for our people?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has proven time and time again that they are there to support displaced workers. Mr. Speaker, we will be there. We are there to provide support to those individuals, those workers at Minas Basin Pulp and Paper, Mr. Speaker. We will be there.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are learning every day that what the NDP stood for in opposition is quite different now that they are in government. In opposition, the NDP felt that the Human Resources Committee, which approves appointments to agencies, boards and commissions, was not functioning properly. They argued, how could they approve a nominee as the most qualified candidate without knowing the names of all those who had applied? They were also very vocal about appointees with obvious connections to the government of the day. So my question is, will the minister responsible for the Resource Recovery Fund Board tell this House and all Nova Scotians if he still believes defeated NDP MLA Joan Massey is the best qualified candidate for an appointment to the Resource Recovery Fund Board?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To the member of, I really appreciate the question on this. I can tell that the applicant is very qualified, and as anybody knows, that Ms. Massey was also an environment critic. So I just ask everybody to look around the table and see that I think she's very qualified. There's a process that all these people have to go through, and I'm proud to say that she understands the environment role. And I support that nominee, and I thank you for the question, and the Resource Recovery Board is doing a great job. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, quote, I'm not sitting here today saying that these people are the best people. I'm not sitting here today saying they are not the best people. What I am saying is that the members of this committee do not have the information before them by which they could make that judgment. That is the point, and that is why I intend to vote against these nominees. Not because of any feeling I may have about them as people, as citizens willing to serve the public, but because as a member of this committee, I do not have the information to make the judgment that I am called upon to make. Mr. Speaker, that was the former Minister of Finance, current member for Halifax Fairview, on March 27, 2001. Mr. Speaker, at the time, the NDP felt that the government of the day should disclose the list of all candidates to appointments. Well, I have another one coming up, Mr. Premier. Hold on. I got a more recent one for you as well. Mr. Speaker, at the time, the NDP clearly stated that the Human Resources Committee was not functioning. The member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, as chair, indicated that changes would be coming before the Assembly Matters Committee for consideration. I believe that was 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, and Nova Scotians are still waiting. So my question is, will the Premier explain why, after 3 years in office, his government has not corrected the problems they identified with the Human Resources Committee appointments process?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the member opposite is that we advertise very broadly across the province for nominees, so we make sure that the people who come forward are appropriately screened. Mr. Speaker, these, as you know, these appointments are not are a lot of work for very little in the way of anything in the way of remuneration. The simple fact of the matter is we're grateful to the people who apply for these jobs, and we don't discriminate against them because they happen to be Liberals or Tories or New Democrats. The only thing we look for is that they are in fact good nominees.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, May 27, 2008, the former Minister of Finance and current member for Halifax Fairview said, quote, "A person's party affiliation should be simply irrelevant. It shouldn't disqualify someone. It shouldn't qualify them. It's hard to imagine many people saying with a straight face that of all the people in Nova Scotia, if Marianne McGraw were not a former Tory MLA, that her name would have come to the top as one of the very best qualified people in the whole province to sit on a board dealing with very valuable waterfront property." Nevertheless, there it is. Now, Mr. Speaker, the NDP were more than happy to take shots at a former Conservative member of this House, but now when it comes to one of their own, she's highly qualified. And why wouldn't she be qualified? Because in her application she said, quote, "I built my own backyard composter and now have 2 backyard composters which provide my gardens with nutrients." Mr. Speaker, the Resource Recovery Fund Board is one that hands out millions of dollars to municipalities throughout the province to promote recycling here in this province. This is the government that has appointed former MLA John Holm, Justin McDonough, former candidate Linda Power, and now former NDP member Joan Massey. Why again, Mr. Speaker, after 3 years, is the Premier refusing to make changes to the appointment process so that the committee can see all applicants to determine who truly is the most qualified?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we advertise very broadly for qualified candidates. As was actually pointed out in there, we don't discriminate on the basis of party affiliation. There's lots of Liberals, lots of Tories who have been appointed. I know that he picked a tiny little piece of that application to talk about composters, which would be a good place to start with that question, Mr. Speaker. But I have to say, we're very thankful to all those people who apply for these positions. We thank them for their service to the province. It's a valuable part of public participation.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Finance avoided an answer on whether or not she was going to be able to deliver on her predecessor's promise to balance the budget this spring. After cutting $65 million from education and $100 million from universities, after hiking taxes and fees, and after putting at risk our health and social programs, this finance minister still can't promise a balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, why does the minister refuse to tell Nova Scotians if she can deliver on her government's promise of a balanced budget this spring?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Although her question had quite a few factual errors in it with respect to the amount of money that has been given to school boards and given to health authorities and so on to operate their affairs on behalf of people in the province of Nova Scotia. You know, Mr. Speaker, we inherited a tremendous mess during a very, very difficult period of economic recovery from a very serious and deep recession. And this required a thoughtful and balanced approach to bringing this province to a better place, using our resources more effectively and using them in a way that people would get the benefit. And we have done that in each and every department of our government. We've been able to bring department spending in under budget every year for 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Not an easy thing to do. And Mr. Speaker, we have seen 8,800 new jobs created in our economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are working very hard to restore fiscal sanity to this province. We've done it without breaking any collective agreements, Mr. Speaker, unlike what that party did when they were in government, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think there's no question our figures are different than the Minister of Finance is talking about today. But what we do know is that when the budget was tabled, the estimate for 2011 pegged real gross domestic product at $30.3 billion for Nova Scotia. I said yesterday that the private analysts have downgraded our growth to 1.5%, and that equates to about a $60 million decrease next year. That is a significant amount of money in the economy if that's the hit. What Nova Scotians don't know is what specific effect this economic downgrade will mean to the revenues of the province, and more importantly, what this economic downgrade will mean when it comes to the NDP's cuts to education, health, and social programs. Mr. Speaker, will the minister tell Nova Scotians what a $60 million drop in real economic activity means to her department's revenue projections?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true that organizations like RBC, for example, have revised their forecasts for Nova Scotia, as they have for most other provinces in the country, and indeed for the Canadian economy, Mr. Speaker. They've done that because the economic recovery has not been as strong here in Nova Scotia, or perhaps the country, or internationally, has been anticipated. I'm sure the member is watching the American economy very closely as well. But Mr. Speaker, I met with the senior economist for RBC, and he told me that in fact they have a very, very optimistic outlook for Nova Scotia for next year and the following year. Their forecast is optimistic because of the hard work that this government has done in controlling spending, in creating jobs, and in growing our economy, Mr. Speaker. So we are on a path to a better day, a path to a day that's significantly different than what we inherited from that lot over there and what they inherited from that lot there, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, given the minister's comments, I can only say I look forward to pointing across the House and saying that we've inherited a mess from that lot over there. Mr. Speaker, The minister tabled a deficit budget that's past spring, and the latest update projects a deficit of $250 million. That's $250 million in cuts to education, health, and social programs, and that is just the beginning to get us back to balance. I have just mentioned in my second question that we're $60 million further in the hole, as it would appear, and all of this continues, what the NDP continues with handouts to large corporations at the same time. Mr. Speaker, will the minister tell Nova Scotians how much more education, health, and social cuts they can expect from this government, or has the minister simply abandoned the balanced budget?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, during difficult economic times, what this government will not do as a way to find revenue is we will not put tolls on the highways in the province. We will not build P3 schools. We will not suspend collective bargaining. We will not remove inflation protection from the poorest people in the province through their social programs, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have a balanced plan. Our plan is on track. It is working, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to tabling a budget in the spring and enjoying the support from those parties for where we arrive. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Today, Mr. Speaker, another 135 Nova Scotians were told that they will lose their jobs by Christmas time. That's 135 good full-time jobs that we can now add to these 6,300 full-time jobs that have been lost under this Premier in the last 3 years, and I will table the Statistics Canada report that comes from. During that same 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the rest of Canada has gained 716,000 full-time jobs, while Nova Scotia, under the NDP, have lost 6,300 and now 135 more, and I will table that statistic for the benefit of the Premier. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is going backwards on jobs. The rest of Canada is going forwards on jobs. My question to the Premier, why is Nova Scotia losing jobs while the rest of Canada gains jobs?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what he just tabled. I haven't had a chance to have a look at it. What I do know is that the latest Statistics Canada figures show that there are 8,800 more jobs in Nova Scotia than there were in June of 2009 when we came into power, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the job numbers are going in the right direction. What we do know, of course, is that we are dealing with some of the largest recessionary pressures in the history of the world since the Great Depression. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a difficult time to be in government, and that is why we have put in place the foundations for a stronger economy through ensuring that we get the budget back to balance by getting rid of the $1.4 billion deficit left to us by the Conservative government. In fact, over the last 3 years, we have actually raised more money through the budgets to cover off the deficits than we have spent. So, in fact, money has in fact been paid down on the debt since we came into power, Mr. Speaker. That is true. The fact of the matter is our debt to GDP ratio continues to decline. In fact, the Dominion Bond Rating Service, Mr. Speaker, points to Nova Scotia as an example for the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to table the message from the Minister for the first set of financials for the province since the NDP came in, which records that for the year ended March 31st, 2009, the province had a net surplus of $19.7 million. That's a fact. Of course, it's signed by the member for Halifax Fairview, who we miss more in that job every day, Mr. Speaker. Premier,
She does too.
Mr. Speaker,
She does too.
Mr. Speaker, I just heard the Premier say it's a difficult time to be in government today. You know what? Excuse me, it's a difficult time to get a job in Nova Scotia today. That is the important thing that the Premier needs to learn. The Annapolis Valley is the case today with Minus Base, 135 jobs, Fundy Gypsum, 150 jobs, Mason's Apples, another 30 jobs, all in the Annapolis Valley, full-time jobs that can add to the total under the Premier's watch, with the second worst percentage of full-time jobs lost in all of Canada over the last 3 years. I'm happy to table that. He can take it up with Statistics Canada if he doesn't agree. Worst full-time job losses in the last year, September to September. He can take that up with Statistics Canada if he doesn't agree. Fact of the matter is the Premier keeps looking at the part-time jobs, but when is he going to admit that under his watch, Nova Scotia has lost 6,300 full-time jobs, including 315 more today?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I suppose anybody, they always say that figures don't lie, but liars sure can figure, Mr. Speaker. It's simply...
Order, please. Order, please. Well,
Just the same.
that's, yeah.
That's right.
Honourable the Premier.
Anyway, if the leader of the Conservative Party was offended by that, anyway, I take it back because I want to. This is a serious matter, and the simple fact of the matter is that we have put in place a comprehensive jobs here plan where small, medium-sized businesses right across the province are getting help in increasing their productivity so that they can take better advantage of the opportunities in front of them and to hire more people for full-time work, Mr. Speaker. That is what's happening. It's happening in places like Mulgrave at the machine shop. It's happening in companies like LED Roadway Lighting, which continues to expand the book of business that it has, Mr. Speaker. And it shows up as it has in Statistics Canada because we have 8,800 more jobs today than we did when we came into power. The simple fact of the matter is that you can try and distort it any way you want, but the reality is that the people out there know that they have a government that has built a program for the renewal of the economy based not on the fact that the government knows what's best. In fact, we went out to the business community, to the labor community, to community activists, and they delivered to the government the Jobs Here program, which is now being implemented.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, in Nova Scotia today, for every job vacancy, there are 10 people chasing it, while in the rest of Canada, the ratio is only 5 to 1. It is twice as hard to find a job in Nova Scotia today as it is in the rest of the country, and I will table that document for the benefit of the Premier. In addition, Mr. Speaker, our average weekly earnings are the second lowest in the whole country. The Premier is proud of the part-time jobs that are there, but is ignoring the reality of full-time jobs in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier, will he now admit that high taxes, high power rates, high price inflation are not a better deal for today's families, but are actually an impossible hardship for today's families?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no question if we weren't saddled by some $12 billion worth of debt run up by the Liberals and Conservative governments of the past, we would be in a much better situation. But the simple fact of the matter is that we inherited that burden from them. That makes up part of the cost. Fortunately, because the Dominion Bond Rating Services continues to improve the outlook for Nova Scotia, our interest costs continue to go down, and that is a benefit to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I want to read, for the benefit of the Leader of the Conservative Party, an email that was received from the President and COO of Intelligent Dynamics Canada. So I wanted to draw I wanted to drop a line to personally thank you for the wonderfully effective innovation voucher program, your warm personal welcome to all of us in Province House yesterday. I'm a newcomer to Nova Scotia, having done business in such diverse places as Israel, Japan, Hong Kong, and Massachusetts, all of which are considered to be world leaders in entrepreneurship and innovation. I can attest firsthand that the climate created by our provincial government here in Nova Scotia is by far the most welcoming and supportive to small and medium-sized business entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, I'll table that.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. It seems like this question period's turning into a late debate show.
That's right, Junior.
There seems to be some long-winded people here that like to speak a long while. Maybe I'll take my time. Mr. Speaker, my question's for the Premier also. Yesterday in question period, when asked about his decision to send law amendments to Shelburne, the Premier said, and I quote, "So we think it's only fair that they have a voice. The fact of the matter is that other places have had an opportunity to give input." Well, Mr. Speaker, neither the first round nor the second round of public meetings held by the Boundaries Commission were held in my area of Digby, a community greatly impacted by this process. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the Premier, will the Premier commit to sending the Law Amendments Committee to Digby, since they didn't have a chance to have their voices heard concerning these boundary changes?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we would welcome any of the input from the residents of Digby. The Law Amendment Committee sets. They are open to anyone who wants to come. They can come here. They could go to Shelburne if that's closest for them. They have an opportunity to have their input.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his government and the Minister of Fisheries say the people of Shelburne were not consulted over this. So I believe the Premier's made a decision that they go to Shelburne. The people of Digby are saying the same thing. If Shelburne can have this, why can't we? They're asking this question. The people of Digby deserve the same chance as Shelburne does, because they're impacted just as bad. So will the Premier commit today to send the Law Amendments Committee to Digby? And when will this committee get together? Because we have two members in our party here that haven't heard anything about this committee even getting together for law amendments.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I might just point out to the member that the simplest, fastest way to get the Law Amendments Committee to consider this report would simply be to move it on to law amendments.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on his final supplementary.
Question, will you go to Digby? That's the question. You know what the question is.
Again, I will ask just this final supplement, Mr. Speaker, and it's just a simple question, because the simple question was asked about Shelburne, and the minister said, okay, let's go. So my simple question is, will you come to Digby with law amendments? You have the power to do that.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we're not going to redo all of the communities that were done by the Electoral Boundaries Committee. They were around the various places. In fact, those that were affected in the first round of the Electoral Boundaries report know that was going to happen. They had an opportunity to respond at that time, Mr. Speaker. But I want to be really clear. If they want to participate, we would welcome to have them before the Law Amendments Committee.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of the lease in Cornwallis has raised more questions about the government's ability to handle taxpayers' money. As we know, the NDP agreed to spend $2,890,000 of taxpayers' money on an office space, but are hiding the details about who will ultimately be footing the bill. Yesterday, in defending it, the Minister of Fisheries said, and I quote, "I'm confident we made the right decision. I'll stand and defend it." And then an hour later, the Premier took this file away from him. For my question to the Premier, what did his minister do wrong?
Honourable the Premier.
The minister did nothing wrong, and in fact, I want to thank him very much for what is a is an admirable job that he does in that department on a day-to-day basis.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Well, I'm interested to hear that the Premier thinks renting a building at $135,000 a year that only cost $168,000 in the first place is an admirable job of handling taxpayers' money. But the fact of the matter remains, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier took the file away from the Minister and is reviewing it in-house. The Premier is going to have to forgive Nova Scotians for not leaving it at that. Mr. Speaker, after all, the Premier's record of handling their money, agreeing to Muskrat Falls without knowing how much it'll cost, buying a paving machine that we don't need, bailing out large corporations with no plans for job security. My question to the Premier, if he's so confident that nothing was done wrong, will he agree to hand all the files related to that lease over to the Auditor General for an independent review?
There you go. Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the simple fact of the matter is that what we have done with taxpayers' money is invest in the future of this province. Tens of thousands of jobs associated with the largest industrial contract in our history that could not and would not have been won without the investment of the provincial government, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell him is that with respect to the lease documents, I intend to do one better. I'm going to release all of them so that anyone who wants to have a look at them can, and I don't dictate to the Auditor General whether or not he wants to see him. If he wants to see him, he's welcome to see him.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Premier brought up the example of the Irving Shipyard bid because it was won on the basis of a competitive tender. That's how the Government of Canada knew they got the best deal for those ships. That's exactly the problem with the Cornwallis lease. There was no tender. There was no analysis of whether buying the building would have been better than leasing the building at 10 times more than the cost of buying it. There was no business sense whatsoever in deciding how to handle that building. It was just a plain old throwaway of taxpayers' money. The Irving Shipyard deal is a great example of what the government should have done when it comes to leasing its own space. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has an opportunity to prove his words, not by sitting back and hoping or waiting or maybe thinking the Auditor General might at some future date decide to look at the file. Why not be a Premier and send those files to the Auditor General and ask him for his opinion on whether this was handled right or not?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the odd thing and ironic thing about this, of course, is the program that was designed to ensure that community development organizations were able to get access to things like work done from government was actually put in place by the Conservative government. He is essentially criticizing the exact program that they put in place and utilized, Mr. Speaker. The simple fact of the matter is that the comparisons that he tries to draw are nonsensical. It's based on a square foot cost, the same square foot cost that exists right across the province, Mr. Speaker. It's based on the market in that area, the same way that it is done here in Halifax, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance. The film industry in Nova Scotia contributes roughly $100 million a year to the provincial GDP, and the film tax credit is an essential part of this industry's success here in Nova Scotia. However, it's becoming clear that bureaucratic duplication is causing unreasonably slow processing times for applicants. Mr. Speaker, is the Minister aware of these problems regarding the slow processing times for the film tax credit applications?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for the question. The film industry is a vital part of Nova Scotia, and I'm proud to say that the tax credit that we have enjoyed a great deal of support from the Premier when we were in opposition, and continues to enjoy support, as does that industry. And we will continue to work with the industry and look for the absolute best vehicles that we can bring to bear to support such an important industry in our province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the question is around the processing times for the applications for that tax credit. The industry is predictably frustrated with the government over these slow processing times. In fact, we've heard from industry representatives that this backlog of applications is due to duplication of efforts within the bureaucracy. This additional red tape is a very immediate concern for producers, investors, industry guilds and unions within the industry, and it is important that the Finance Minister take these concerns seriously. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a letter that was sent to the Minister as well as an email to the Deputy Minister on this subject. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is what steps is the Minister taking in order to address the concerns around slow processing time?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member again for the question. Mr. Speaker, there are two departments involved in the processing of support to the film industry, and we have in Nova Scotia Film Nova Scotia, as well as then the process within the Department of Finance. And we are working very hard across departments to understand what the concerns are from the industry and what it is that we can do to facilitate a smooth processing of applications. And that analysis and those discussions are underway, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the industry points specifically to the Department of Finance as the cause for the backlog. They cite duplication of efforts between Film Nova Scotia, as the Minister has said, and the Department of Finance. But they do say that the Department of Finance is the cause for the backlog. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, will the Minister look into this process within her department and streamline the application process as quickly as possible to eliminate this unnecessary duplication?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, we are doing the analysis on the process for the film tax credit. We are working with another department through that process, and I have indicated to staff in my department that I would like an opportunity built into my schedule to meet with people from the industry, and we will be doing that, Mr. Speaker, so that we can understand better what specifically are the concerns that they've been raising. But I want to tell members that there has been no change, there have been no policy changes, and there have been no other changes with respect to the film tax credit. It remains essentially the same, and so we need to hear from the industry, assess the processes we have in place, and work as hard as we can to ensure that the objectives of the tax credit and whatever other programs we might have to support such an important industry are effective, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of Natural Resources. Private contractors are being offered $43 to $45 a tonne for pulpwood delivered roadside by the new owner of the Port Hawkesbury mill. Now that's down, Mr. Speaker, from the $53 a tonne that was being paid by NewPage, and it is actually less than what it costs to produce a tonne of wood. My question to the Minister is, when the Minister and his government were negotiating the deal with Port Hawkesbury Paper, were there any discussions about the price to be paid to private woodlot owners and contractors?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Certainly being a private woodlot owner myself, I know
You know, we're always interested in getting the best possible price for your product, whether it's pulpwood or studwood or logs or whatever. And I can remember cutting those products in the past and selling them on the open market, on the free market, and that's still true today. Well, you know, somebody's cutting wood, I'm sure they're negotiating with sawmills and with pulp mills and hardwood mills, wherever it is. But in Nova Scotia, we do have a free market system.
For Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A 2011 consultants report commissioned by the Natural Resources Department said that in order for the province's pulp and paper mills to be supplied sustainably, there will be a need to be increased participation from private landowners. Now, Mr. Speaker, Russell Huntington, who is the owner of Marion Bridge Pulp, who employs 5 people, says it cost him $47.30 a ton to produce pulp delivered roadside. The producers hoped to get at least the price that they were getting when the mill shut down. Mr. Speaker, these mills that this government put large amount of dollars into, they put a large amount of money into this mill, Mr. Speaker, and the reason they did that is because the operator said he wanted to come here and make a profit. But I think it's very logical to understand that if the people that are supplying the wood product and the wood fiber cannot make a profit, then how indeed can the mill stay sustainable? Unless, of course, you bring everything in from the outside. So the question that I would ask the Minister of Natural Resources is, can he please tell the hosts, and more importantly, the private wood contractors, what steps he and his government have taken to ensure that private woodlot owners in Nova Scotia are treated fairly and not thrown under the Dexter bus like so many other small businesses in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member would know that using a member's name in the chamber is not inappropriate. I would just remind the honourable member that using a name as a former speaker would know the rules of the legislature and know that using somebody else's name is not allowed in the legislature. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, naturally, everybody wants the best price for their product, and you know, and I know we're in challenging times. Certainly, it's important now that mill operated by Pacific West is open. It's providing great jobs in the Strait area and throughout eastern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island. And there's thousands of families now that come to rely on the paychecks that are from both the mill directly and indirectly. And but again, we're in a free market system. I would encourage woodlot owners to work together and to work with the mill. I know some have already come to an agreement, like MR McDonald Holdings have signed an agreement with Pacific West. B.A. Fraser from Cape Breton have done the same. And I would encourage the two parties to come together and mutually agree to what's a good working price for both of them.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
It's hard to believe that this minister believes that it's a free market system when his government gives them $150 million to operate. Mr. Speaker, Pacific West. If you were allowed to talk, you wouldn't be sitting in the back bench.
That's it.
Long time.
Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, I hear these comments from the other side, and so be it. But anyway, Pacific West was negotiated a deal with the province, which has harvesting rights of Crown land similar to the former owner, NewPage. And that means that they direct harvesting operations, maintain the roads on those lands. Private land contractors, on the other hand, have to pay stumpage, build their own roads, and organize where they operate. and this all adds to their bottom line and their costs. Russell Huntington said to the Chronicle Herald, no matter how, and I will table that, Mr. Speaker, no matter how efficient you are, at the prices they are offering, in 5 years, your gear will be all worn out and you'll be left with nothing. My question to the Minister of Natural Resources is simply this. What does this minister have to say to the private contractors who need a fair deal to continue operating in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, all companies, private individuals, all pay stumpage, whether it's Pacific West or if you're buying from a private landowner, stumpage has to be paid by those that are harvesting it. But this government has invested strongly in the Strait region. We've invested in the workers and their families and the communities in eastern Nova Scotia, and we continue to invest in with private woodlot owners, and we have lots of programs through silviculture programs. We've invested $2 million just recently on silviculture treatments for small and large landowners. We invested almost $4 million in silviculture in 2012-13. We just had a recent announcement around a private road program that was taken up very quickly. So there's lots that we're investing through our natural resources strategy. The path we share is investing in workers and investing in private woodlot owners in this province.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, we continually see from this minister what has been described as, quote, devastating errors in judgment, end of quote, regarding decisions around programming and funding in public education. I will table that. Parents are angry, students are losing out, and teachers are frustrated with those decisions. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they demanded that she be replaced as Minister of Education on April the 12th, 2012, and I will table that. And here's why, Mr. Speaker. Direct budget cuts to boards of $31.1 million, downloading inflationary costs to boards of $33.9 million, and by my math, Mr. Speaker, that adds up to $65 million. $65 million. Other poor decisions include eliminating reading recovery, eliminating math mentors, removing and/or adjusting negatively the class size caps, cutting funding to educational assistants, underfunding supports like school psychologists, speech pathologists, behavior specialists, and Mr. Speaker, I could go on. But Mr. Speaker, the most devastating of all is that there was no mention of students with special needs in the speech from the throne delivered in the spring of 2012, and for the minister's reading, I will table that. Pages 19 and 20 is all that was dedicated to education, and Mr. Speaker, not one mention of special needs students. So my question to the minister is this: how can this minister tell parents that she and her government have made public education a priority when they continue to gut the system?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the speech from the throne was delivered, I think that the Premier, that it was mentioned, the Lieutenant Governor would have mentioned very clearly the students, the children of Nova Scotia. We're talking about all of our children because we have an inclusive community in Nova Scotia, and I'm very proud that we have an inclusive education system. All children mean all children.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister should know that because students with special needs have special needs, they have a special allocation of funding which she has protected, which she has restricted. So I do beg to differ. Special needs students do have a special place and should have been in that speech from the throne. Mr. Speaker, parents are advocating for the needs of their children. Teachers are advocating for the needs of their students. Associations like the Learning Disabilities Association of Nova Scotia, Autism Nova Scotia, and school advisory councils are advocating for their kids. Mr. Speaker, there are some members in the caucus over there who I know value public education. Some of them are teachers, and I've worked with them, and they must be disappointed with their minister, who should be advocating for education, not destroying ignoring it. So my question to the minister is this: when will this minister show leadership, take responsibility for her office seriously, and restore funding to programs and services for our kids?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I take offense to the comments that I do not take this job seriously. I do take this job very seriously as an educator for 30 years and as a parent and as a grandparent, and everyone here has a vested interest in making sure every child in this province succeeds. We have a Kids and Learning First program. We are investing in our students. We are in a position now, we have had severe declining enrollment. We are making sure that we're making strategic investment in skills trades, co-op program, succeeding in reading. We're making sure that our math is stronger, that we're making sure that we're having all of our children succeed. This government is investing in education. Unlike the last government, well, I remember when I was an educator 18 years ago, when we were sent home without pay for 5 days.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I would have been a teacher 18 years ago.
Order.
And what I can...
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Colchester North has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, when will this minister stop mucking around in public education and base her decisions on student needs rather than trying to defend a government that has yet to demonstrate in any way that education is their priority?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. Education is our priority. We are investing in all of our students. We are making sure that they have the ability to have skills trades at school, that they're getting help with their literacy in primary, unlike the last government that put reading recovery in for very
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to minister has expired. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please call government bills for second reading.
Government bills for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Could you please call Bill 94?
Bill 94. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, yesterday during question period, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal advised the House that he would be providing the name of who was responsible for the lease that was signed for the new office in Shelburne. Since the Minister told the House that he would be providing us with that information, I'm wondering if the Minister will take the opportunity now to do exactly as he advised the House yesterday.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Yes. Thank you. There was no lease signed, Mr. Speaker, and indeed I indicated that I would look at it to determine who from the department was involved in it. The Premier has indicated that he is going to be reviewing the whole of the document, all of the documents, the whole file. That's his prerogative, and soon we will have a determination, and all of those documents, as the Premier said, will be made available. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but it's not a point of order. It's a disagreement between two members, and the Honourable Minister said that he would table that and didn't give a specific time. He just said it again that he will table the documents when he has them in his possession. The Honourable Member for Preston on Bill number 94, the House of Assembly Act.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, how much time do I have left? I believe it's 20-some minutes.
28 minutes, I think, maybe.
28?
I think, yeah, my math is good today.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to continue on with the sort of on the theme that I had before. But before I talk about this in any detail, what a negative effect this has had on so many communities or will have in many communities in Nova Scotia. I just wonder, I listened with great intent today as a question was asked here how the Law Amendments Committee was structured to go to Shelburne. Very interesting question. Never did get an answer from the Premier on it at all. And I believe, if my information is correct, that the Premier did say that the Law Amendments Committee decided that they were going to meet in Shelburne. Well, I've talked to both of the members that are on the Law Amendments Committee in our caucus, and they never, ever went to a meeting. I don't know and the Conservative members said they were never consulted whatsoever on this. So we wonder how we decided to go to Shelburne. Well, it appears maybe that the Premier decides that he wants to potentially save his Minister of Fisheries seat and have this in Shelburne so the Minister can save some face and indeed maybe win a seat in the future if they make some adjustments there. But it'd be interesting to see if they do make adjustments or amendments, how that's going to affect the rest of the province. We're already on the third go-around in this report. We had a first interim report. We had a second report. The Minister of Justice wasn't happy with it. I'm sure he was directed by the Premier to gerrymander it again and make sure that whatever long-term goal this government had by messing around with all the ridings in the province was adjusted to their political advantage. So, you know, we had an independent commission that wasn't independent at all. They were told what to do, how to do it. And when they come back with the first report, they were told again how to do it, what to change, to make sure that the Premier and his caucus were happy with what's come along. But there's holes in that because here they've seen the riding of Cape Breton Nova been eliminated, the Speaker's riding. So that makes it very, very interesting. And a question I really want to ask of the government, and I know they won't answer this question, I'm going to ask anyway, just so the people of Nova Scotia are aware of just how prejudicial this process is when you're going to go to one community, Shelburne, where you have a sitting cabinet minister and have Law Amendments Committee. Now, in all the years I've been here a long time in this legislature, and I've never ever heard of this ever happening before. Now, it might have happened in history before, I am not sure, but it's never happened in at least the last 20 years. So the question is, I want to see one of these Law Amendments Committees meetings in Preston, so I can see the residents of my community that don't have to travel all the way to Shelburne or to Halifax or whatever the case may be, go into our community, and the member makes a joke of this, was over 200 years before a government recognized the importance of the Preston riding. So you're making a joke. So you're making a joke of that. I'm sure the people in my community will be highly insulted by the backbenchers in the NDP, and they should be insulted. Seriously insulted. And here we are, you're going to treat one part of the province different than the other. And we should have a meeting in Cape Breton Nova. The seat's been eliminated. In Cape Breton. We should also have another one in Yarmouth, another gerrymandered riding. Definitely should have one in Clare, one in Argyll, and one in Richmond. And Cape Breton West, we should have one there as well. So when this committee goes on, the Law Amendments Committee goes on the road, which is a committee of the legislature, and the only way the Premier can gerrymander that is by having more members on the committee than the opposition parties have, so they get whatever they want and they'll do whatever they want. You know, so you see all these communities should be treated exactly the same, You know, we should go to Richmond, we should go to Digby, and the list goes on and on. So when is there going to be a meeting of the Law Amendments Committee to decide exactly where this committee is going to meet? And there's not a word, there's not any consultation been made between the chair of the committee or the Premier's office, who seems to be running this whole thing, where they're going to meet. Give the people a chance of Nova Scotia. People are upset about this. People are very upset about this. And they're going to be more upset when Election Day comes and a lot of the people don't realize where they have to go vote, or even join an election campaign when they don't know who the candidate is going to be and the ridings change as the process goes on. So you see all the things that this government has done. And you see the negative impact it's had on our province. I mean, today we had another announcement that another one of our paper producers is shutting down. Another one. The only difference this time is they didn't get that big bonus check that the other paper mills got before they closed down. So I don't know, maybe they're not as smart as the other people were to get that money from Nova Scotians, or maybe they decided they couldn't just participate in that kind of an activity to further deaden the province's economy and destroy jobs in Nova Scotia. This government has done more damage to employment in this province than any government in history, and that's bar none. And this province has been through some hard times. A lot more hard times are coming. And you're going to see some awfully hard times as a result of what this government did with the 25% increase they put in on the GST when they put the GST up, a 25% tax increase, double-digit tax increase. And, you know, when you go and you see what's happened here and what's happening, and you talk to the young people that are leaving the province because they can't find a job, they can't do the things that they need to do, and you look at the high unemployment that we're faced with and the things that are happening in this province, it's basically unbelievable. And you go back, and this particular bill, is another thing that this government has done that's just totally unbelievable. Unbelievable. You get an independent commission to review the boundaries. You get the results from the independent commission, government doesn't like it. We don't like it. Go back and here's what you've got to do. And they're given marching orders to do that. That's the sad part of it. If all these boundaries would have been structured the way they are today, because of the independent committee's recommendations, their recommendations, not gerrymandering from government, that would have been acceptable. The point is, the government gerrymandered with this thing. They fooled around with it with the intention of political gain, and there's no other way to describe it. So if that's what's happening now, we see this party over there that used to be so righteous when they stood on this side of the House, and they were so proper, and everything was great, and they were going to fix everything in the world, and all of a sudden they get to government, and all that changes. All of it changes. And you know, it makes you wonder how they can do this to Nova Scotia and the people of Nova Scotia. You know, you just go in. This gerrymandering with the boundaries is something like you would hear in a third world country where a dictator runs what goes on. Not much different. It's not much different. You've got, the only difference is we have the media here, and that sort of hold people accountable for what they do, and that's a good thing they do. But this whole thing, as it's transpired, is a disgrace to the political process in Nova Scotia. It's an absolute disgrace. And until we hear what the final bill is going to be like, dear knows what that's going to be. Maybe I would say that they're probably going to have to save the seat in Shelburne. They're probably going to have to save some other seats. I don't know what they're going to tell or how they're going to do the amendments in this whole process to save some of their elected members, so hopefully they think they can get back to government. I don't know if that'll ever happen. There's so many upset people in this province with this government today. It's a pretty slim chance that they'll win election again. And for our financial health in this province, I certainly hope they never get reelected again. So, you know, and that's what I'm hearing everywhere. And when we go see what they have done and how they've gone about it, it's simply unbelievable. You ready? You know, this is very upsetting. Okay. Well, we see it's very upsetting with what's happened to the people in the province. And next thing you know, they're going to decide, if they stay in power long enough and they get arrogant enough, they're going to finally say, well, we don't need elections anymore. We'll just have a vote in the legislature, put ourselves back in for another 5 or 6 years. And, you know, they're not far from that by the way they've gerrymandered with the process. So, you know, I wasn't going to speak on this bill to start, but after I've heard so many complaints from so many people about how this was organized, how it was done, how everything was switched around and changed around to make it better for this party to try to get 2 more seats in Metro where they hold most of the seats, where they figure they might get 1 or 2 of these seats and eliminate a couple more outside out in the rural areas. Well, if I was sitting in rural Nova Scotia, I'd be very upset. People in Metro are very upset about this whole process.